guys, welcome to another episode of Singing of the Bismarck that we have by William Schiller. Okay, so this is the chapter you've all been waiting for. Okay, that's just the Google. So this is the chapter you've been waiting for all along. Chapter 11, Final Battle, the Sinking of the Bismarck. To the men on the battleships King George V and Rodney, waiting impatiently for the kill, it seemed, as one officer later wrote, that the dawn would never come. The crews were at their battle stations all through the night, though half of them at a time were given permission to snatch some sleep at their posts. The captains of the two ships remained at their compass platforms. They kept track of the plotting of their own positions and that of the enemy, as reported during the night by the destroyers, which were snapping at the heels of the Bismarck. They also kept scanning the eastern sky for the first faint hint of dawn. When Commander W.J.C. Robertson, Chief of Staff for Operations, thought he saw it, he went down to his cabin on the King George V to fetch his steel helmet. He was amused to see four large rats scurrying about in terror. Apparently, even the rats aboard knew the ship was going into battle. The commander-in-chief also had been up most of the night, taking in the signals from the destroyers and waiting as impatiently as everyone else for daylight to break. Admiral Tovey still didn't know exactly where his prey was. For nearly a week, the thick clouds had hidden the sun by day and the stars by night. The ships could not get a bearing. They had to plot their position, as well as that of the Bismarck, by dead reckoning. This was never completely accurate. For this reason, the commander-in-chief during the night had asked Captain Vian's destroyers to fire star shells to indicate the Bismarck's location, but the rain and low clouds, he had not been able to see them over the horizon. It soon became obvious that daylight was not going to bring any improvement in the weather. As the skies began gradually to lighten on May 27th, the clouds still hung close to the area. The rain did not let up. The seas remained high. The wind blew out of the northwest as strong as ever. In the wretched visibility, Sir John began to search for the Bismarck. Because of the fuel shortage of both his battleships, he knew he had to find the German Leviathan and sink her within 2 or 3 hours by the most. By 10 a.m., he would have just enough oil to limp home. At this critical juncture, the cruiser Norfolk came to his aid, as she had been at the beginning of the chase off Iceland. Though herself dangerously low on oil, she had been racing south all night to get in on the fight. At 8:15 a.m., her lookout sighted the Bismarck 8 miles dead ahead. Captain Phillips turned his cruiser hard over to get quickly out of range of the big ship's guns. As he swerved, he sighted the Rodney and King George V in the distance. He could thus serve as a visual link between them and the enemy. Admiral Tovey's 2 battleships were actually off course. Had it not been for the Norfolk, the commander-in-chief might have missed the Bismarck once again. Quickly, he altered course. 28 minutes later, he finally sighted his target 12 miles directly ahead. It was the first time he had actually seen the Bismarck. After nearly a week of frustrating, nerve-wracking pursuit, he had cornered her at last. He moved in at once for the kill. He could see that the Bismarck was moving very slowly, headed into the wind, but he had no reason to doubt that Admiral Lutyens could still use his excellent guns with customary accuracy. The German battleship had managed to dispose of the Hood in a few minutes. Admiral Tovey signaled to the Rodney, which was about a mile off his port side. He knew her, he told her she was free to move and to fire as she thought. best, but should conform generally to the flagship's maneuvers. He was not going to fight the rigid battle that had cost the fleet the Hood. At precisely 8:47 a.m. on May 27th, Rodney opened fire with her 16-inch guns. Within the minute, King George V got off her first salvo of 14-inch shells. The Bismarck did not reply for about 2 minutes, though when she did, her fire was dead accurate. Her third salvo straddled the Rodney, on which she concentrated her big guns and almost scored a direct hit. Captain Dalrymple Hamilton on the Rodney turned a little to port so he could bring all of his guns into action. Soon he was pounding the Bismarck with full broadsides. The King George V plowed straight ahead. In this position, she was unable to use her aft guns, but she was rapidly closing the range. The cruiser Norfolk, which had refrained from firing at the Bismarck during the earlier action with the Hood and the Prince of Wales, now joined in the battle. She began firing with her 8-inch guns at 20,000 yards. A second British cruiser soon entered the fray. This was the Dorsetshire. She had been escorting a convoy 600 miles west of Cape Finisterre on the morning of May 26, when she picked up the signal that the Bismarck had been found again. Captain B.C.S. Martin saw that the enemy was a mere 300 miles, almost due north of him. On his own, he left the convoy and steamed off at 28 knots to try and get on some action. He had arrived on the scene just in time. At 9:04 a.m., the Dorsetshire turned her 8-inch guns on the enemy and opened fire. Thus, by shortly after 9 o'clock, the Bismarck, helpless to take avoiding action because of the damage to her rudders, was being shelled by 2 British battleships and 2 heavy cruisers. Such superiority soon began to tell. The British warships were now scoring direct hits with their big shells. One of the first salvos was seen to knock away part of the Bismarck's bridge. The German guns, though still blazing away, were losing accuracy. At 1 minute before 9 o'clock, Sir John turned his flagship south so he could bring a full broadside against the enemy. The Rodney followed her. They were now both only 1,500 yards from the German ship, which was yawing roughly north. After 15 minutes of continuous exchange of salvos, Admiral Tovey found that he had passed the Bismarck. He turned his ships around for another run parallel to the enemy, this time northward. The range had lowered to a bare 8,000 yards. Both the Rodney and King George V were delivering full broadsides as fast as the big guns could be loaded. The Bismarck was obviously hurt from such a murderous fire at such close range. A large fire was seen belching smoke and flame amidships. Some of her 15-inch guns were no longer firing. A lookout on the Norfolk saw 2 of them drop almost to the waterline. Others pointed crazily at the sky. Their hydraulic controls, it was evident, were no longer functioning. One gun turret was blown clear away, its twisted metal toppling against the bridge. About 10 o'clock, a little more than an hour after the action had started, the last of the Bismarck's guns were silenced. She had been reduced to a flaming, smoking, battered hulk. Though the jagged shell holes in her side could be seen the bright flames of fires consuming her insides. And yet above the blazing inferno, the Bismarck's flag still flew. She was beaten. She was finished. But she would not surrender. It was almost impossible to reconstruct the carnage as it was experienced at this hour by the 2,400 Germans aboard the battered battleship. Each of the 118 survivors later had a tale of horror to tell. But only 3 of them were officers, all of junior rank. The overall picture, as seen from the bridge, can never be told. Admiral Lutyens did not send out a single message about this last battle. He did not even signal, as was customary, that it had begun. He could not, in any case, have sent many messages. One of the first salvos from the British battleships blew away the Admiral's bridge, and with it Admiral Gunther Lutyens. Captain Lindemann might have survived. Miraculously, he escaped injury even when his bridge was demolished by a British shell. Junior officers urged him to jump overboard with them when it became clear that the ship was doomed, but he stuck to his post to the end. Battered and silent and afire though she was, the Bismarck would neither surrender nor sink. Admiral Tovey thought his guns had poured enough heavy shells into her to sink a dozen battleships. During the run to the south, the Rodney had fired 6 torpedoes at the Bismarck, and the Norfolk had fired 4 in an effort to dispatch her by this means. All had missed, but the bombardment by both heavy and light guns had not let up for a moment, and still the flaming enemy hull kept afloat. The commander-in-chief was both puzzled and impatient. He had never imagined that a ship could take so much punishment and not go down. Time was getting short. German long-range bombers from France had been reported approaching. German U-boats were known to be converging on the scene. The Rodney and King George V were already zigzagging as they fired. This was a necessary precaution against hostile submarines. Worst of all, the oil tanks on the 2 British battleships were so low by 10 o'clock that Tovey was not sure he would have enough fuel to get them home. Impatiently, the Admiral sent orders to Captain Patterson on the bridge of the King George V. "Get closer! Get in there closer! I can't see enough hits." The 2 battleships plowed in closer, the Rodney turning so she could fire with all her 9 16-inch guns. She also dispatched her last 2 torpedoes at a range of only 3,000 yards. One of them hit, the first occasion in naval history that a battleship had ever torpedoed another. The Norfolk also launched her last 4 torpedoes at 4,000 yards. One of them hit, but the Bismarck did not go down. Vice Admiral Somerville asked for another try at it with his swordfish from the Ark Royal. They had disabled the Bismarck in the first place. Perhaps they could finish the job. The planes took off from the Caire at 9:25 a.m., but as soon as they arrived over the German battleship, they saw that it would be impossible to get down to launch their torpedoes. The shell fire from their own ships was too intense. The squadron leader signaled Admiral Tovey, asking that he cease fire while the planes made their run to the target. There was no reply, except for the King George V's anti-aircraft guns, which started to fire at swordfish in the belief they were German planes. Captain Patterson noticed the mistake at once and told the officer commanding the flak guns to desist. "Can't you see your airmen waving at you?" he asked. "I thought they were Huns shaking their fists at us," the officer replied. Now it was 10:15 a.m., and Admiral Tovey had to make a hard decision. It was absolute imperative for him to turn his big ships home and their dwindling oil reserves. Now, they would make only a slow speed as it was. This would add to their peril if the German bombers and submarines attacked. He looked over a last time at the burning wreck of the ship he had been firing at with all the guns and torpedo tubes of the fleet. She still floated, but he knew she was finished. She would never make port. Satisfied that he had destroyed her, but disappointed at not having sunk her, he ordered the Rodney to form behind him as he set course northeast for Britain. As he steered for home, he sent back one last signal. If any of the cruisers or destroyers had more torpedoes, they might launch them point blank in an effort to send the battered Bismarck to the bottom. The cruiser Dorsetshire, which had arrived just in time to see some action, had 3 torpedoes left. Her skipper, Captain Martin, had not waited for the Admiral's last order. When he saw the 2 big battleships turn for home, he acted on his own. He turned into within 3,500 yards. 2 of his torpedoes were sent skimming toward the Bismarck's starboard side. One of them hit just under the remains of her bridge, toppling over what was left of it. The time was 10:20 a.m. Then he circled to the port side and at 10:36 fired his last torpedo at 2,500 yards. It tore a big hole in the waterline. Slowly the Bismarck, her flag still flying, heeled over to the port side and turned upside down. Then she sank beneath the waves. The clock on the Dorsetshire bridge read 10:40 a.m. At that moment, Captain Martin took in the Admiral's signal to try to sink the Bismarck with his remaining torpedoes. He replied that he had just done so and the Bismarck had gone down. The great British fleet quickly dispersed. The Ark-Royal Swordfish, still in the air, jettisoned their torpedoes. It was too dangerous to land with them on the carrier's deck. When they returned, they found the Ark-Royal under attack by German bombers, which he finally reached the scene. Vice Admiral Somerville, as soon as the Swordfish had safely landed, ordered Force 8 to head full steam south toward its base at Gibraltar. Despite the arrival of German bombers and the reported presence of U-boats nearby, the British Navy still had an errand of mercy to perform. The murderous bombardment of the Bismarck had not killed all the members of the crew. Miraculously, several hundred men had survived the blazing inferno, though many of these were still wounded. They could now be seen from the British ships clinging to debris in the water or swimming about in great patches of oil. The cruiser Dorsetshire and the destroyer Maori moved quickly in to rescue them. It was impossible in high seas to lower boats to pick them up, but lifelines were thrown out and jumping ladders strung over the sides of the 2 ships. Most of the German sailors were too badly wounded or too exhausted to hoist themselves up the lines of ladders. The British crews went to work to haul them up. One officer in the Dorsetshire, a Lieutenant Harvey, jumped overboard to save some of those who were drowning or choking to death from having smelled oil. On the decks of his 2 rescue ships, first aid was given to the German survivors as soon as they were hauled up. Oxygen was administered, stomachs pumped out, oil washed off. Injections of morphine were given to relieve pain. And then occurred the last irony of the Great Sea drama. A lookout on the Dorsetshire cried out, "Periscope on the starboard bow!" A general alarm sounded. "All hands to action stations!" Reluctantly and with a heavy heart, Captain Martin had to give the order to abandon the rescue operation and make away zigzagging to avoid the torpedoes of the German submarine. And final irony of all, a German U-boat whose periscope appeared, it was the U-74, had no torpedoes left. But the British could not know this. The Dorsetshire, with 83 survivors aboard, and the Maori, with 30, steamed off to get away from the torpedoless U-boat. Several hundred German sailors, whom the 2 ships could have saved had not the German submarine appeared, were left to drown in the cold, stormy sea. The U-74 took some time to surface. She was able to pick up only 3 men alive. The German steamer, the Sachsenwald, rescued 2 more. Of the 2,400 men of the Bismarck, only 118 survived. Thus the chase ended. It had taken the British Navy a week to bring it to a successful conclusion. It had taken 8 battleships and battlecruisers, 2 aircraft carriers, 4 heavy cruisers, 7 light cruisers, 21 destroyers, and 6 submarines to help find the Bismarck and sink her. In the process, Each side had lost her mightiest warship. It remained now only for the British to give the world the climatic news. At 11 o'clock on the morning of May 27, 1941, Prime Minister Winston Churchill rose in the House of Commons in London to make a report. The ancient seat of the British Parliament on the Thames had been bombed out. The Commons was meeting in a nearby church house. "This morning," Churchill said, "shortly after daylight, the Bismarck, virtually at a standstill, far from help, was attacked by the British pursuing battleships. I do not know what the results of the bombardment. It appears, however, that the Bismarck was not sunk by gunfire. She will now be dispatched by a torpedo." He had barely sat down when a note was passed to him. He rose again. "I ask the indulgence of the House. I have just received news that the Bismarck is sunk." The House, Churchill commented later, seemed content. The Hood had been avenged. The next day he cabled President Franklin D. Roosevelt in Washington, D.C. "I will send you later the inside story of the fighting with the Bismarck. She was a terrific ship." At noon on May 27, German Naval Group West picked up from London a radio bulletin from Reuters, the British news-gathering agency. It announced the end of the Bismarck. At 1:22 p.m., according to the secret German naval records, Group West sent out a coded radio message addressed to Admiral Lutyens. "Reuters reports Bismarck sunk. Report situation immediately." There was, of course, no response. Never again in the 4 more years that World War II was to last did the German battleship venture out into the wide Atlantic.